Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the South Coast Insider. And we are closing in now on 90 podcasts, which is quite an accomplishment. And we have pretty much a diverse representation of people, artists from the South Coast artists community or the South Coast creative community. And every podcast is a new and phenomenal addition. So with that in mind, I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves and spell their name, as has become now a tradition, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ron, for having me on. So my name is Kate Frazer Rego. I'll start spelling, strap in, Kateefrazer, no hyphen, another word, Rego.
Okay.
And I am New Bedford born and bred.
Good for you.
Well,
It's funny because, I always ask people, do you have issues with your name? And like the hyphen is, well, my wife is Paula Bachelor no hyphen Fortier. But she's like, nah, it'll just be Paula Bachelor because that's way too much to spell out.
It can get long. I know a couple hyphenated names that are like, but no, we just never decided to hyphenate.
Yeah. Although now there are couples who, it's interesting, they will flip-flop their names.
Oh, yeah.
So the male will now take the subservient position, if that's what you want to call it, versus the dominant position. So, you always assume that, the last name is the dominant name, whereas the middle name is she didn't want to let go of it.
Certainly. I love questioning gender roles. I think it's fabulous. I mean, I think it starts to move us more towards a matriarchy than a patriarchy, which is great.
It's weird. I mean, we label everything, and that's where it starts to get crazy. But with that in mind, you have one of those quirky names, the Frazer name.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those names that could be, but might not be, but may be. So it could be Scottish, but may not be Scottish. It may be French, because in this area specifically, we have so many Huguenot names. Those were French Huguenots who got kicked out of France, a Catholic country, to the British Isles, and then all hell ensued. One of the most famous back-asswards ones, I think I mentioned this to Autumn Leaf Seer, was the famous wine, Haut-Brion, in the south of France. As the famous, Haut-Brion was the wine that you would want, just like Dom Perignon was the sparkling wine champagne that you would want.
Oh, okay.
Comes to find out, with the crazy land reassessment or whatever in Scotland and Ireland, this Irish family left in 1749, and their name was O'Brien, but the French couldn't pronounce O'Brien, so it was Haut-Brion. See what I got?
That's pretty fantastic.
Because phrase is strawberry in French.
Yes, it is indeed, and that is exactly my family. Yeah, we were a bunch of, I guess, French strawberry farmers that went to the Highlands and And then we stayed.
Yeah, you turned in your
And then I think
yeah.
I think from there we went from Scotland to Canada, and then from Canada down to Fall River, and then from Fall River to New Bedford.
Yeah, yeah. Migrations. So,
Oh yeah.
how did you get to be what you have become?
Not a loaded question at all.
No.
How did I get to be what I became? Well, I guess I'll start at the beginning, Ron. And I mean, I thought this was taken care of for you, but when a man and a lover really love each other, sometimes a kid happens.
Yeah.
No, my parents went to UMass Dartmouth. They met at UMass Dartmouth. And I came along a few years later.
Okay.
My mom is a nurse. My dad worked for the Department of Mental Health in Massachusetts for years and years. He's retired now. He's a professor. He teaches at BCC. My mom is no longer like a nurse, but she's the ER manager over at St. Luke's. Yeah.
Well, my question should have been more succinct. How did you get to become an artist?
That's a different story, Ron.
Yeah. Well, you see.
No, I mean,
yeah.
it was I was very, very lucky in that I always had adults around that made art a priority in my life. I always had access to crayons and Play-Doh and playtime. And it was just something that, I was very fortunate. And as I got older and, the artistic itch kind of took hold, I had very, very supportive parents. And I was really lucky to have all of the teachers in my life that I had that kind of, steered me and put me on the path.
That's interesting, because as you're saying that, everybody, always have to go back to your initial experiences and such about, how did you know when you knew that you knew? And I guess it's like, finding that significant other person, for some, people, I guess they have this romantic version of the violins and fireworks and so on and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
But the whole art thing is, it's there. And I think the only thing that ruins it are other people. I mean, was it Camus said, hell is other people.
Certainly. No, I think that the beauty of children, and this is one of the reasons why I enjoy teaching children so much, is that, I think that there is this wonder and this inherent making ability in kids, and kids want to make, and they want to create, and they want to discover the world with their imagination and their problem solving. And that gets snuffed out earlier and earlier. And I feel like becoming an artist is just this constant return to that place.
Yeah. Because we're always forced, and I just realized I didn't have my camera on, but it would help. Yeah. But because then you can see my face, like to see if I'm pulling your leg or whatever. But visual cues, which that's what we do. And it really is amazing that culture, the lack of culture, I guess you'd want to say. Having lived in Europe for a year, it's such a different vibe over there. You say you're an artist, and people are like, "Oh my God, tell me all about you. Let me see your work." Blah 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 blah. And here it's like, "Oh, that's nice."
Oh, how fun!
Oh, how fun! Yes.
Oh, how fun! That's the one that I love. Oh, how fun! I wish you were my art teacher. Yeah.
But speaking of art teachers, you just made me flashback to Ms. Kennedy, Maureen Kennedy, who was my the first art teacher, because the nuns, for some reason, you know, I spent 7 years in parochial school until my
Okay.
my mother and my stepfather bought a house in Dartmouth, and then it was like, oh my God, I have to go to the school of those same students who come to our school and write dirty words on our desk. So anyway, so having Ms. Maureen Kennedy, who was, wow. I mean, yeah, she, in my mind, she was a drop dead gorgeous redhead, had this incredible mothering personality, and saw something in me that wasn't so much that something I didn't see, but she just verified something that I felt.
Mhm.
And she wrote, like, we have those in eighth grade. There was back then the eighth grade graduation. We didn't have like a yearbook or anything, but everybody would bring in this autograph book at the end of the year,
Yeah.
And she wrote something really cool in there, and it was like, wow, So, how long have you been teaching?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say 10 years. I did a year in higher education, and then I've done 9 years where I'm currently teaching now, which is at Alma Del Mar Charter School.
Okay. Yeah, big difference.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Could you tell me how that transition was for you? Because I had taught college as an assistant, my assistantship, but I was actually the instructor of record because the professor I was supposed to assist became very ill and couldn't. He was overseas and couldn't make it back to Florida. And that was a really incredible experience. And then I was working for the school department, the New Bedford School Department, and I was thrown into the Keith Middle School. Oh, actually, was it called that? Yeah, I think it was called Keith Junior High.
Yeah,
that's what it's
Keith.
called.
Oh yeah.
It was Keith Junior High at the time. And it was like, oh my God. My brother has a different kind of a story because he was there at the time, my younger brother. And he walked into class, he's like, oh, cool, it's my brother. This is gonna be easy. I was like, no. But it was a whole different thing. I mean, you had people who really had no idea, either A, had no idea why they were in an art class, B, thought it was a recreational period, C, didn't want to be there or in school anyway. So that was quite a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, well, let's see. Let's start back. So when I was in graduate school, I did have the chance to assist one of my professors with a couple classes, which was great. But where I went to grad school really didn't do an awesome job of like preparing you to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. They just kind of said, you're going to finish up grad school, you're going to move to New York City, you're going to teach classes, and then you're going to become a famous artist, like, okay, thanks. Perfect. I'll do just that. And there were a lot of folks in my graduating class that did that, but that was just never something that interested me. That was not how I defined success. Mm-hmm. I wanted to come back here. I wanted to come back to New Bedford, because I thought that there was a lot of potential. New Bedford's changed so much from when I was a kid, like in the 90s, downtown in the 90s. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't even recognize it. Yeah. So I moved back here, but I was commuting to teach at LaSalle. So I was like taking like the bus to the commuter rail and yada, yada, yada. And when I got there, I was just kind of like bumping up against these kids who were trying to figure out college, and just didn't have the spark yet. It just wasn't there. Kids would walk in and say, well, what do I have to do to get an A+? Like, well, that's not quite why we're here. Yeah. And meanwhile, while I'm doing that, I'm also feeling like very wet behind the ears because, I'm brand new. I don't really know. Like, I obviously am familiar with my syllabus and like, I know these concepts because I'm obviously a practicing artist, but there's such a difference between like being a practicing artist and teaching, that I just wasn't ready yet. But while I was doing all of this, I'm volunteering at this brand new tiny charter school in New Bedford. So I would leave my college classes and come down to this tiny charter school where I have kids whose eyes are just like lighting up, talking about Dadaism and surrealism and doing abstract self-portraits and just kind of like blowing it wide open. And they were so excited. And quite honestly, the work they were making was so much more interesting than anything I was seeing in my higher ed classes or some of the things that I'd been seeing in grad school.
Yeah.
So when their art teacher at the time, who was another UMass alum, so we were familiar with each other, she was moving on. She said, you should apply to this school. So I did. And 9 years later, I'm still there.
Wow.
But yeah, but I mean, it's due in large part to just all of the really awesome teachers that I had, like in high school, in college. I just felt like I had to pay it forward, like when you get really blessed with like a good teacher, like someone that can really mentor you, you just have to keep it going.
I mean, to me, and I think it's a Hindu concept of the world where you've got the turtle and then you've got another animal on top of the turtle and another one and another one and another one and another one. And I always said, because we have a lot of teachers in our family and good teachers, teachers who, my cousin Lisa and my niece Shelby, for example, and my cousin Katrina, and I can tell how passionate they are when we, get together and speak about it or on Facebook or whatever. And it was something that I lived, ate and slept because as crazy as it may sound, when I did have the opportunity to do studio art, if I were given a choice of never painting again versus never teaching again, oddly enough, I would have chosen never painting again. And people are like, wow, that's sort of nuts. I said, no, it's not, because there was this incredible connection. There's this incredible pipeline to the future. I can't explain it. It's almost like when Robin Williams' character of Aladdin when there's the changeover from the evil guy, that incredible power. Especially in drawing classes, all I ever wanted to be was a foundation drawing teacher, because there was a bit of sadomasochism involved, because you take everybody and you break them down to the lowest denominator, so that there's no longer the crows in one corner and the doves in another corner and the peacock in another corner. Everybody's down to the same level at the gravel. And then they stop, because they've come in with a lot of misconceptions, preconceptions, bad habits, and then you slowly stop building them up. And not in your image, you start slowly building them up. And then there's the ones who struggle. And there's this one, I've got to go back. I still have a drawing of that day that it was like a rifle shot. I've seen it happen before. I've experienced it before in class, even when I was teaching marketing. But with her, it was like a rifle shot, because when it hit her with incredible cosmic force, and I could see those eyes just burst open. And that drawing, everybody in class went, wow. And she looked at me and went, it was so easy. All I had to do was not think like you said.
Yeah.
It ruined her relationship with her boyfriend at the time. I'm assuming at the time, because I don't know if they continued on, but he was above her. If we have to have a pecking order, a social pecking order, he was above her in his quote unquote talent. But from that moment on, she just like blew everything out of the room. And it was exquisite. The line quality was absolutely exquisite. And this is for a first year. Yeah. And that's an incredible thing. How does any of this translate into your work, if at all?
Any of my teaching?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that my practice gets informed by my teaching all the time. And I try to bring a lot of my own personal practice to my teaching. I think that if you want your students to walk the walk, they have to see you do it too. So like I talk to them a lot about, making art and using the concepts that I teach with them. But I think it's also just letting them know that it's attainable. Like you can do it. But I mean, they're constantly inspiring me with their line or their color choice or there's no inhibitions. And they just go for it. I have this third grader right now who is blowing my mind because they are using concepts and techniques that like I didn't learn until I was in college. It's not developmentally appropriate for me to teach him how to draw the figure and he's just like picking this up and running with it. So it's just like giving him the resources to just kind of keep running with it.
Yeah.
They fill my cup, I fill theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the mantra would be, look, I do what I teach what I do. And I think that that's important. And yeah, I stand on the shoulders of other teachers, and they in turn stand on the shoulders of their teachers. So if I'm doing a good job, then you'll stand on mine. And that's really, really important. As far as your work is concerned, your practice, how did it evolve? Where did it come from, and where are you now?
Man, all right. So I would say that the work I'm making now is very, very different in, I guess, in look from what I was making in undergrad and graduate school. But I feel like a lot of there's like a line that kind of carries throughout. Mm-hmm. I've always been very intrigued with stories by narratives. I've always been very, very intrigued with the idea of memory and the fluidity of memory and connection. And a lot of my work has always touched upon all of those things. But I would say that after grad school, I had, your standard existential crisis. Like grad school ended and I didn't.
Free fall.
Exactly. I was in a total free fall. And then I got this, teaching job. So now I was like a teacher. I was the art teacher who was teaching, but not making any work and, free falling after grad school and I was floundering. And then I realized that I was going to have my daughter. So in my first year of teaching, I realized I was pregnant and it was like right after grad school. So like a lot of things kind of happened in quick succession. But when my daughter, Franny was born, like everything changed. I don't know if you're a parent, Ron. Are you a parent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my daughter went straight out of grad school.
Okay. All right. So you have the idea. It was a complete transition. It was like crossing a threshold is how I describe it. The person that I was before I walked through that door into being a parent, different person. And once she was born, I kind of just stopped questioning a lot of the doubts that I had and just started like making stuff. I went to Haystack for their conference, and it was a conference that year about process and play. And I had the absolute pleasure to meet a fellow artist there, and her name is Emma Welty. She's a fiber artist, great lady. And I met her there, and we were chatting at the conference, and I was telling her about some things I'd been thinking about in my work and how nothing was really working. And she was like, and I had, you know, off the cuff, I don't even remember like what I was mentioning, had said, well, like, you know, what about this? She was like, well, why the hell not? Go for it. I was like, well, geez. Yeah. So I came home. I came home from Haystack, and I started making these like Sheila Nagig kind of like vulva shapes. And thinking a lot about motherhood and, you know, symbols of femininity and just trying to create like a visual language. And I was not having a lot of success. And then I was like, yeah, I'm a sculptor. Why am I making all of these drawings? I'm a sculptor. I need to make something. So I made my first labia series piece. And then from there, I just kept making. And then the next thing I knew, it was 3 years later, and I had like 30 pieces of work. And Den Santoro and Helen Granger were kind enough to give me a show at their S&G gallery. And that kind of kicked it off. And then, you know, I've just been like playing with a number of series from there. But the work I'm doing right now is a lot of like world building, playing a lot with like mythology, creating narratives, but it has to do a lot with, connection, you know, the transaction that happens when two bodies collide in space. We live a lot in a digital world. I mean, we're on Zoom. And, you know, in that digital world, you know, I'm going to say a whole bunch of vocab, Ron, that I don't know if you know, but deep likes and ghosting and swiping right. And it's very surface and superficial. But under that glossy surface, people share a lot of secrets and desires and information. And things get lost there in that space. And the things that people promise to each other and say to each other, and the connections that are made and the transactions that happen between folks in relationships, all of those things, and how all of those interactions and connections and transactions play into like the most vulnerable places in you, and how you speak to those vulnerable places, like who governs that land.
Oh, no, it's true. I mean, it you know, it's superficial. I don't want to say at best or worst, but it's superficial on one end, not giving it a positive, negative end, but on one end it's superficial, and on another end it's very, very profound, because there have been moments online where a community have come together in either communal rage, or in incredible support, where people are like, you know, here's my shirt, here's my shoes, here's my key to my house. That kind of overwhelming love and attention. To you know, fortunately, sometimes this turf wars and wars of idealism and all kinds of other stuff. Really, you know, at one point somebody equated the television set to the electronic campfire. And the internet is really kind of a substitute for something we don't do anymore, and that's going to church. Because that was another bizarre kind of social activity.
It was certainly
people who were on the social fringes, who couldn't afford the nice clothes, that was horrifying for them, because they were going to be judged or ranked. And then, of course, you know, you could always tell the ones who were better off, because there was a pecking order that was established there. But yet it was
at church.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you went to parochial school. Did you go to St. Joe's?
No, I went to Immaculate Conception. And then I went to St. Anne's, and to this day, after my experience with the Holy Cross nuns there, I still have this compunction to raise my hand and salute when I see a nun, because it was a French order, and every time we saw one of the nuns, it's Salut Marie,
Oh, okay.
salute to
Yeah,
Mary.
yeah, yeah.
It was an interesting education, to say the least.
I'm sure.
Also being an altar boy. And I've met up with a couple of my friends, and we're looking at each other, and it's seriously going, nothing happened to you, did it? It's like, no. I mean, I really racked my brain trying to figure out if anything,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
And the
No.
worst story I ever heard was a friend of mine who's a photographer who, I was going on about my first marriage and about how this priest was like incredible. He was a Pied Piper, blah, 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 blah. And as I'm speaking about this man, I can see his face just completely starting to fall. And like, well, what's up? I mean, Father so-and-so, and he's like, yeah, he abused me for 6 years, jaw drop. So, we've got all of these things, the internet, social media and everything is great in one way because it exposes things that used to be kept secret or hushed or whatever. Generations before us have gone to their graves with secrets. There are
Certainly
very little secrets left. And I don't know. Is it an art form? Does the internet assist us? What does it do for our practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think that you make a good point with it being very much like on a spectrum. I think that, the internet has the ability to be a place of incredible connection. And I have certainly made like incredible connections with artists across the world through the internet. I mean, my gosh, I was able to maintain a career throughout the entire pandemic doing just this, teaching this way, which is a huge blessing. But I think that in speaking to hiding things and speaking to keeping secrets, I think the internet can also be a place of that and minimizing things, keeping things, oh, well, this didn't really mean that, or, this like didn't mean anything. This connection didn't mean anything because it's all just swipes and likes and superficialities. But I think there are truths about human connection that go beyond that. And I think that people need to think more about the connections between the folks that they interact with. And I just like exploring that space. And one of the artists that I was always really drawn to was Boltanski. Are you familiar with his work, Christian Boltanski?
I probably would have to see the work. Yeah, can you describe it?
Yeah, he plays a lot with memory and like creating like false memory and false narratives. Like he'll create this shrine that you think that you're looking at this shrine that's dedicated to all of these school children that were killed in this tragic event. And you later find out that actually it's just a whole bunch of pictures of his classmates from like Skokie, Illinois in like 1972.
Right.
And this idea of like creating reverence and awe and the,
false empathy.
The malleability. Yeah, no, I wouldn't necessarily say, I mean, I guess you could create this conversation about false compassion and false empathy. But I look at it more as like the fluidity or the malleability of memory. And a lot of my grad school work had to do with that too. The idea of like earliest memories and how they kind of can transmute and transform. And the work I do now all kind of like explores this space that these days I've just decided I'm just going to talk about it as if it is real. It exists. I go there. It is a place. So I am like a documenter of this space, of this void. The void is what it's called. And like all of the inhabitants of it and all of the, relationships and narratives that I'm finding there, and like the archetypes.
Do you believe that occurrences of the most heinous kind, horrible things, that it's like the ringing of a bell? If you've ever been near a big church bell or a big gong or whatever, and that thing gets whacked and you can hear, and then that sound does start to dissipate, but the vibration remains in the air. Mm-hmm. It's weird because you're like listening, and it's still, and you're waiting for it to go, but it just lingers and lingers and lingers, and it's no longer more of a sound than it is this vibration that's moving air or something.
Yeah.
That's what I've been exploring lately.
Okay.
Something that I avoided for years, and trying to put myself into that space. Mm-hmm. When I was an abstractionist, and I got to stop saying that because I think I can actually play both sides of the fence. From what I've been getting from the social media, like now that I'm doing one kind of work, the other work's like being noticed. Like, wait a minute, when I was doing the other stuff, it was like, now I'm doing this. It's
isn't that always the way though?
It's the weirdness of human nature, but this idea of horrible occurrences, people being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Yeah. It's not wanting to go back there to fix it, but going back there to understand it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of what I'm doing now in my work is kind of like, exploring those like vulnerable places. I used to think when I was like exploring the void, that the void was entirely like a digital landscape, that it had a lot more to do with like this idea of internets and swipes and likes. Mm-hmm. And as I keep exploring and documenting the space, I'm finding that like the internet, and certainly is like a conduit to it, but the void has so much more to do with like that internal journey, that journeying into yourself. And how you heal those places, how you close the voids.
I have found that doing this show, and believe me, I was thrown into this by my friend and co-founder, and Jeff. We've discussed this, and I ended up doing this because like I've said it before, the old joke was, well, you got a face for radio, but I certainly don't have a voice for radio. And, but I have been in a very, what's the word? I'm really thankful because I've been able to speak with so many artists. Yeah, it's almost like therapy sessions sometimes. I discover so much more about art, other artists. I discover that I'm not alone in thinking certain things or doing certain things. Yeah, and that's why I had a conversation with Kat Knudsen, and told her about the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club. And what a great organization that was. It started off with two guys having a cup of coffee or breakfast, and it just grew and grew and grew. And my wife comes from Detroit, which is a massive bloody city. And yet the sense of community, the sense of community there is like absolutely phenomenal. And
I mean, after the auto industry left, people had to build everything back again. I mean, and the art community was so much of what did that.
I think that the art community may be close to the number 2 industry, which I think is the same thing here in South Coast, but nobody's really recognized it as such, because I think at one point somebody pulled a number out of the clouds. They said that we as a community are responsible for like $9 million of revenue. And I just think to Forrest Gump with that famous scene when he's in the hospital. When he says, you know, what you in here for, boy? I got shot in the buttocks. Like, boy, you got yourself a $1 million wound. And then, you know, Forrest Gump replies, government must have kept that money. I ain't seen a dime.
That $1 million, yes.
Exactly, you know? So it's like, so where is this money? Where is this money? But then again, there are so many of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like everybody came out. And there's more and more and more and more. And okay, there's probably the good, the bad, the ugly, and just the totally indifferent. Because, you know, that's what happens. I mean, the cream will rise to the top, supposedly, and so on and so forth. But still, what a phenomenal position to be in, to be able to speak to people. For example, at one point, I was what's the word? Concerned about speaking to a young artist like yourself, because it's like, okay, I was speaking with the older people, the people my age, and it's like, oh, you remember here, remember that used to be, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, what am I going to talk to a young person about? It's like, well, talk about art, stupid. And then I found that there really is no ageism. There's really no, the passion is the passion. The experiences that form the art. Actually, your generation is probably more interested in the past than my generation is, for some oddball reason I can't quite put my finger on. You know, you guys are like entranced by mid-century architecture and, you know, lifestyles and movies and all that other stuff. Maybe,
what do they say? If you don't know your past, you're doomed to repeat it. So
exactly. Of course, too. You know, there is no good time. There is no bad time. There is only the present time, because, you know, we lived at 5 minutes to midnight, which was, we were waiting for the bombs to drop in parochial school. You know, grab your rosaries, and we had to go into the spidery, dark, nasty places to wait. And, you know, basically, people would say, "Kiss your ass goodbye," because we were waiting for the bomb to drop.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have, each generation has these things that nibble around the edges of their consciousness. And when going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, you know, we're talking about gender roles. Yeah. And I remember in teaching art history, I told them that I would tell the students, isn't it kind of interesting that here we are in the caves, and we started off with this Mother Earth thing because there was a fascination with blood, especially menstrual blood, and the phases of the moon. And there was a connectivity, and there's a completely different thing. And then all of a sudden, Father Sky, whoever the hell he is, shows up. And now it's not menstrual blood, it's the blood of the slaughtered. All of a sudden, you know, there's this crazy, this is mine, this is yours, and you know, and this limps along until I think the 11th century, when the cult of Mary starts to emerge, which is really motherism again. It's the Mother Earth thing. The whole feminine mystique starts to come back. And just by the look on your face, it seems like I hit something. So what was that?
Well, I was also raised a Catholic. I stayed in it until I wasn't that old. I was about 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And then my parents got divorced.
Yeah.
And then I guess being the very observant 8 or 9-year-old that I was, saw kind of the hypocrisy in the reaction of some of the people that I went to church with. My CCD teacher decided it was a good idea to get up in front of class and say a whole bunch of very, very derogatory things about my recently divorced mom. So I went home and I went, I'm not going back. Don't ask me. Yeah. And I didn't. But, you know, mea culpa, those run deep. Some of that Catholicism, it runs deep. And I've always been, I've always been intrigued by it. You know, the imagery, the mythology, the symbolism in it. And certainly, I mean, all of that stuff. Like I talked about Sheila Nagig's. Sheila Nagig's, you know, hung over all of those old Celtic churches. And it's, the origin du monde. It's, it's the origin of the universe.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look at a lot of those early gospels and the Gnostic gospels, the ones that all the guys didn't want in the books, like the Gospel of Mary, women are far more involved in the church and are far more sacred in the church. And I think that was a huge blow. I think guys like being on top a lot, and no pun intended. And I think that, it's all about oppression. And I think that a lot of those ideas, the idea of like the sacred feminine, were like oppressed for a number of years. And like when these tiny pockets and I guess cults started talking about Mary again and worshiping Mary and Mary Magdalene and, all of these female saints, all of that came back into play. But the Bible's wild, man.
Here's a history thing for you while we're on that. 1962, Vatican II, the big reformations when they spun the altar around, because I guess somehow they thought that they could stop the bleeding of the congregations by showing them what the big mystery was all about, what the priest was doing hunched over. And at the same time, the pill came out. And Mother's Little Helper, Rolling Stones, which was banned on the radio. And most women said, screw this, got up and walked out, never went back. So there are these things that at one time art used to bring this stuff to the forefront. And now, for the longest time, there was nobody, there was the Vietnam War and the protests and so on and so forth, but there still wasn't that. Music was doing it, but art really wasn't shoving it in your face all that much.
Shoving, like pushing gender roles?
Pushing everything forward. In other words, like saying, okay, enough. You can't spin the altar around, and you can't say, that women don't have the rights over their reproductive rights. You can't say that women can't be priests when that's crap, because they were the first priests to begin with. Because even in the whole term pagan is such a misapplied term. Paganos, citizen. Okay, and they were the women. The women are the ones who tended the hearth fires. They tended the altars in the house. Blah 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 blah, and all these things. And for some reason, and I would teach when I would get into the modern era, and around 1840, and say, okay, here's what's happening. The church no longer has its grip on art. So now we're getting into the pastoral, and now we're getting into the allegorical, which is just basically bullshit for being able to show breasts. But she is a goddess, so we can show her breasts. But the housewife, we can't show her breasts. She is
the housewife.
Yeah, it's just the big sort of stupid lie. And the point being is that, God or mysticism or spiritualism or something carried art all these years because it was an instrument of instruction and tradition and so on and so forth. And then we got to the point where we have these galleries where we've got these big color field paintings and so on and so forth, and they became the new churches, the new cathedrals, and the painters became the new gods. Okay. Yep. And so it's been a really crazy, wacky kind of an experience in the arts, and probably more so and more difficult in the last 50, 70 years, I guess, from 1950 to now. Although there has been some transition in the last 10 or 20 years, but and now also too with women. Being more out there as artists, because going back to the 70s and one instructor saying that he hated teaching women. And it was like, I don't think I should be hearing this. And he's like, no, 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 no. You don't get it. It breaks my heart. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, it breaks my heart that I see some women who have talent that is like phenomenal. They could blow away any of the guys in the class. But you know what's going to happen? They're going to graduate. They're going to fall in love and get married. They're going to have babies, and they will never, ever pick up a paintbrush again.
Oh God,
This
is such a trope.
At night, you know.
I mean, you know, I think that certainly back in the 70s, that was the case. I would say the large majority of female identifying artists I know are parents, and they're teaching parents and working artist parents and parents. And I mean, I think that certainly at one point that was the case, but it's so moved beyond that.
Oh yes, that's what I'm saying. It has moved.
Yeah, no, which is wonderful. No, I think I lost you there for a second, but I think I'm coming back to your point.
Okay. I mean, it was kind of bizarre. For example, women in abstraction at one point.
Yeah.
It was really kind of weird because I've always had a marketing brain. That's what I ended up going into for sustenance. To be sustained, but to be supported, but not really to be sustained. I noticed that women who are really good abstractionists, and I know this is controversial, it's not meant to be, it's just an observation, not a judgment, but women who drank red wine, which was very unusual back then, or drank scotch, were better abstractionists than women who didn't. And I'm like, why? I've made an observation. I haven't made a pronouncement. I just want to know why. And it's so weird because at one time you could tell a female abstractionist from a male abstractionist just by looking at the work. And it's like, oh, no, that's not possible. It's not possible. It was. And I don't know why. I don't, because there were gender roles that were brought in. You know, the women thought they had to make everything look pretty. And these women who drank the red wine and the scotch didn't make things look pretty.
Well, I think that the women or the female identifying artists who were drinking red wine and scotch were in their alcohol choices bucking up against gender roles.
Yes.
Certainly. I mean, I don't drink anymore, but back when I did, scotch and whiskey were the name of the game for a while there, Ron.
Exactly. Oh yeah, I said that to my own wife, whose preference is scotch. You know, and she.
There was certainly a period of time.
Oh, of course, I really got a. I don't want to say she never really lectures, but I really got the. It's like, look, these are just observations. They're not pronouncements. They're not. You know, because as
you haven't made a formal hypothesis yet.
You're supposed to observe things, and you're supposed to wonder why. And I think really that's what brings us, makes us different from everybody else, is that we have that wonderment, that why.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, I look out my kitchen window over the sink. There's really nothing much to look at. There's a house across the way, and I hope they never think I'm staring in their house. But I mean, I'm looking at this tree. And it's amazing. Yeah. I should photograph that every single morning because the colors are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And watching it as you leaf out and the negative spaces, the odd combinations of color, it's absolutely beautiful. So you look at it and okay, so your question is, what's causing this color shift? Okay, I know the sun's over there, but what's causing the color shift? And what was it? Sunday night when we had that rolling storm that broke.
Oh yeah. That was great.
Oh my God, the colors were like out of Maxfield Parrish after that.
Yes. Oh, I love the light in a Parrish painting.
Yeah. It was weird. I mean, somebody mentioned on Facebook, I think it was Carl Simmons, olive green clouds. And there was just, I mean, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. It was beautiful. We're going to start wrapping this up. And
okay.
And as I told Autumn Leafs Sear, I love it when it goes by too fast in one way because, that means it hasn't been boring. And in another case, it's like, damn, just when we're getting into it, it's when we got to leave this thing.
We can always have a number 2, Ron.
Yes, and I always say this is not a one and done. Okay, this is definitely not a one and done. So
Certainly.
to wrap this up,
Yeah.
Trying to pull a final question out of the Barbara Walters bag of bizarre questions. At this point in your life, looking backwards to when you didn't know where you would be now, how much of a fit is your life now compared to then? Is it totally out of the blue? And I had this conversation with Kat about how things happen when we are the least involved. I explained to her how I got into undergraduate school, how I got into graduate school. I had no freaking idea. I was just drifting along. And yet the things that I wanna never happen.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would depend on which version of myself I was talking to. If I was talking to my 4th grade 10-year-old self, she would be very disappointed because at this point she was certain we'd be living in Scotland in a castle. I would be a historian and I would have bright red curly hair. That didn't pan out. But if you were talking to my, 22, 23-year-old self, I think she would be skeptical, but I think that it would give her hope. I think that looking back on like how I got to here, the reason why I got to here, to tie it all up with a nice little bow, the reason why I got to here is because of the mentors and people that popped up at just the right time to kind of give me a little course correction. I met my husband when he was applying for grad school. And Eric Lintela introduced me. I got the teaching gig at the school that I teach at now because Rick Creighton gave me a phone call and said, hey, I got this lady calling me to do an after-school program at a school, and I thought of you. You want some help with that? And I can never thank those people enough because they kind of steered it. When my high school art teacher, Susan Brunette, great lady, sat down and talked with my mom and said, no, she can go to art school. She can have a whole successful career. She's not going to be starving in a dirty warehouse in Soho. When she explained that to my mom, it just took off from there. So I got to where I am today because of them. And I can only hope that I keep being able to do that for, my students, those tiny course corrections.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. We're not isolated. I remember once in the emergency room for I don't know how many, it was like almost a daily occurrence when my father and my stepmother, I would say the trolley went off the tracks for some reason, and we found out later what it was all about. But one of the nurses said, I've seen you here so many times. How the heck are you dealing with this? And I just had one of those moments where I went to go answer one thing and something else fell out of my mouth. And I said, I think I figured this all out. The only reason why we're here is to be of service to each other. And as long as we are of service to each other, everything ought to be fine. And that's really what it's all about. Yeah.
I think, I think Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Kate Frazer Rego. Okay.
Yeah,
This
you got
this
it.
has been fantastic, and we definitely got to do another one.
I would love to, Ron. That would be
Because
great.
I would love to actually do one based on this conversations. I've had this with Autumn. I've had this with Kat
Yeah.
about how we got to be where we are, and it does come down to these people who just pop up at the right time,
Yeah.
and just they walk us home. They walk us home. Well, thank you very much. Hold on a
Thank you,
second.
Ron.
Fortier with another episode of the Artist Index, brought to you by Heavenly Spirits, who, through their kindness and generosity, make this podcast possible. Thanks so much. Be kind to each other out there. Until the next time, we'll see you. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.